Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as a body language expert, but today we're not going to be analyzing body language. Today we're going to be doing a forensic analysis of Jeffrey Epstein's death. Before we get started with this, a couple of quick things. One, I wanted to make sure you know this is not a psychological evaluation of any kind. These are just my opinions. In addition to that, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. Now, if you've been watching my coverage of Epstein, you'll see that I have already analyzed quite a lot of footage from this night. However, there's a segment that I have not covered, and when we combine that with the DOJ's report, which we are also going to review a little bit of, I think we have found Jeffrey Epstein's killer. And by the time I'm done talking about all this, I think you might come to the same conclusion. All right, let's just jump right in. So where we're starting is about a minute before we spot who I believe is Jeffrey Epstein's killer. Right now, you can see that one of the officers, her name's Officer Noel, her name's going to come up a few times, so I want to go ahead and tell you her name. She's sitting at the desk where the officers sit. You're going to see her get up in a minute, and it's going to be important that you see where she walks. Because if you're to understand the layout of this place, if you look right here, that's a staircase. You're seeing just a sliver of it. That's a staircase that leads up to what's called Tier L. And Tier L is where Jeffrey Epstein is housed. We're going to look at a picture of Tier L later. But right now you can see Officer Noel is getting up. And as you watch, she walks right off the screen. Clearly, she didn't walk up the stairs. I paused it. Clearly, she did not walk up the stairs. She walked directly off. We're going to watch that one last time so you can see what that looks like. All of this matters. Just bear with me. It's so hard to see. It's important to watch it a couple of times. Okay, so she just walked off. So what we're going to do now is skip ahead about a minute so you can see this orange figure walk up these stairs. Now, as you can see, as I pointed out before, clearly Officer Noel did not walk up the stairs. But what the DOJ alleges is that this is in fact her carrying either linens or clothes up the stairs, and that must be what we're seeing. But we've got a lot of details around that we're going to get into from the report that make this much more complicated. Let's just jump right in and watch it, and then we'll talk more about it. So here we are, nearing 10:40 p.m. I want you to watch on the staircase. You're going to see what looks like a figure dressed in orange walking up the stairs. So clearly this is the color of their jumpsuits. No question about that. Let's watch this again. And as far as I can tell, you see somebody moving around. I don't see any parts that do not look orange. Because what is said in the report, let's actually read the report right now. I'm going to pull this up, although we're going to be going much deeper into the report. But for now, let's go ahead and talk about specifically what it says. Through review and analysis of the shoe video footage, witness statements, and BOP records, the OIG determined that at approximately 10:40 p.m., which is what we're looking at right now, a CO, in other words, a correctional officer, believed to be Noel, carried linen or inmate clothing up to L tier, which was the last time any CO approached the only entrance to the shoe tier in which Epstein was housed. Okay. Now, I dispute that that's what's happening here. One, because it looks like somebody's actually wearing orange. And two, because you're going to see for many reasons why that is inconsistent with what comes next. We're going to watch it one last time, and then we're going to move on, and we got a lot more to look at. Because it looks almost like somebody's arm reaches out, or there's something that comes out right here that is also orange. I'm going to go through a variety of reasons why I do not believe that that's somebody carrying linens. And even the report by the Inspector General of the Department of Justice says they believe it was Officer Noel. They do not confirm that it is Officer Noel. And when we go over the details, you're going to see why that seems even flimsier. Now what we're going to do is we're going to skip ahead to the next time we see somebody come in frame. Now I want you to keep in mind, I'm watching this with a very critical eye. You do not see anybody come back down the stairs. There's at no point during this segment that I'm going to skip to that anybody walks down that stairs. You don't see a hand, a leg, a foot, anything. We skipped about a minute ahead, and now we're going to see the next person come into frame. Now, this is Officer Noel again. Now, did you notice how she came in? Directly right to left. There was no part where she walked down the stairs. You didn't see her coming down the stairs. and curve towards this. Once again, we're going to look at footage later of somebody doing that so you can compare it with this. But at no point did we see her walking down those stairs. So at this point, nobody has come back down. One person has come up, and we have not seen anybody come back down again. Now, the question is, when would they come back down? How would they get out if we didn't see them yet? They have to come out at some point. So there's really two possible explanations for if one person came up that we didn't see come back down, what happened? Well, one of them would be, as they're coming back out, maybe it's possible that off in the distance they spotted this camera or realized there was a camera here. Because obviously, if they knew that ahead of time and they were trying to stay hidden, they would not have been visible at all as they walked up those stairs. The other possibility would be that there's a time that's missing from this video, and that's when they left. We're going to skip ahead for a minute. You probably know what's coming next. So here we are at 11:58 p.m. at night. Most of you that have seen anything about this footage know that we are getting ready to come up on a missing minute. So why is this minute missing? Well, if it's missing for a reason, if there's something they didn't want you to see, it's very possible that there's some orange that reappeared during that minute, but we don't know for sure. What we do know is that at no point did we see anybody come back down after they went up at 10:40 p.m. So now what we're going to do is compare officers walking up those stairs to the person in orange that we saw earlier. Okay, as you can see right there, that's what it looks like when an officer walks up the stairs to L tier. Let's watch that again. As you can see, they're very clearly wearing dark clothing. There's no orange. There's nothing that could possibly be mistaken for that. So there you go. That's actually somebody leaning over. They're handing something down. So that gives you an idea of the height right there. That proportionally, I mean, this stuff is so hard to see. I know it's frustrating to try to look at. And I assure you that when we compare this to the DOJ report, you will truly understand why I've come to the conclusion that we have actually seen Jeffrey Epstein's killer on this video. So there you can see, that's what it looks like with somebody coming down the stairs. You can see just a little bit of an outline as they're running down. See, that's what going down the stairs looks like. Now, somebody could avoid being seen if they wanted to. They'd have to be aware of this camera, and they'd have to be trying not to be seen. So sure, it wouldn't be that hard, I think, to sneak up and down. But if somebody's not trying to be seen and they walk down, that's what it looks like. That's why I wonder, why didn't we see that from Officer Noel earlier? Let's look at the orange figure one last time before we really get into the report. So as you can see, this person walking up, after watching people leaning over, it almost looks like this person is leaning over. Like that's the head right there, and then that's the body right behind it. It almost looks like they're leaning over and looking at the desk where the officers sit. So now let's move on to the DOJ's report about this, because the DOJ's report is really why I've solidified my belief that this is in fact somebody who is not supposed to be there. Now let's look at the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Justice's report on the night Jeffrey Epstein died. Now, I have analyzed some of this before, but what we're looking at here specifically is only going to be what's relevant to what we just saw. There's so much more in here. I have some other videos on it that I highly recommend you watch if you're interested in this. I talk about the DVR system, the security cameras, I talk about all sorts of strange inconsistencies, but all of this is going to relate back to what we just covered, and it will help you understand why I've come to the conclusion that I think that we have now seen Jeffrey Epstein's killer. So as we analyze this, there's a couple of things that you've got to know to make sense of it. One is that if you see SHU written anywhere, SHU, Special Housing Unit, that's where they are. They are in the Special Housing Unit. Jeffrey Epstein is on Tier L in the Special Housing Unit, so he's on Tier L of SHU. In addition to that, they're supposed to do head counts at 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 a.m., 5 a.m. Okay, and they did not do any of those. We're going to get into the quotes about that. But understand, they're supposed to do that, and then every 30 minutes, they should be checking on the inmates. That's just part of what they have to do. That's their job. But understanding those fundamental facts helps you better understand some of what I'm seeing in all of this. So here's a couple of quotes I'm going to read you, then we'll talk about the relevance. It's going to get a lot more interesting as we go, but I'm going to try to be thorough, so I'm going to cover everything. So at approximately 8 p.m. on August 9th, SHU inmates were locked into their cells for the night, including Epstein, who was without a cellmate. All right, so at 8 p.m., everybody was locked in their cell. So they are saying that could not have just been an inmate walking around, period. 8 o'clock, that was 10:40. A search of Epstein's cell following his death revealed Epstein had excess prison blankets, linens, and clothing in his cell. So keep in mind, there were 3 other people in this tier aside from Epstein. We're going to go into what they said happened that night and what they recall. We talked about that in another video in a different way, but it's relevant to this, so we're going to go back to it. But keep in mind, there's only 4 people up there. So if linens and clothes were taken up there, they were taken up there either for Epstein or one of the other 3 people, and he had an excess of these things in his cell, which he shouldn't have had at all. The OIG also found that SHU staff did not conduct any 30-minute rounds after about 10:40 on August 9th, and that none of the required SHU inmate counts were conducted after 4 p.m. on August 9th. So they did not do any head counts, which is a really important part of a prison. And as far as the 30-minute rounds, from what they're saying is that what we saw at 10:40 was one of their rounds. That is the claim. This is one last part I'm going to show you from the intro of this. This is a 128-page document. We're not going to talk about every single page. But this is incredibly significant that this was in the introduction. Additionally, the OIG did not observe on the recorded video that Noel and Thomas being the other officer that came later, who were seated at the desk at the SHU officer's station immediately outside the area where Epstein was housed, at any time during the time period, rose from their seats or approached the cell block. So they're basically saying that between 10:40 p.m. and 6:30 a.m., that at no point did they approach the cell block or rise from their seats, which is insane. They get up and move around non-stop that entire time. So the fact that it claims that at no point they rose from their seats is wild. But it goes to show that during the summary, it's trying to form a specific narrative. And it's saying something that is unequivocally, provably, and factually false in every sense of the word. Now, this I just highlighted because it continues to repeat and says many times throughout that Epstein had an excess of blankets, linen, and clothing in his cell. And if he had that excess, and yet at the same time they felt like they needed to bring somebody extra linens or clothes, how is it that they took an inventory of that? How did they know what anybody needed? Because they weren't checking on them. So why did they take, and who did they take the blankets and the linens to? Who was it that needed new clothes? There's no indication at any point as we go through this that anybody asked for that anybody received it. Let's just keep going. So here's another quote. Additionally, the OIG participated in interviews of 15 inmates who had been housed at MCC New York during the time periods relevant to our investigation, including 3 who were housed in the L tier of the SHU on the day Epstein died. Those 3 L tier inmates were housed in cells opposite Epstein's cell and therefore had a direct line of sight to Epstein's cell on the night of August 9th and 10th. Now, as we're going to see when we look at what the cells looked like, while technically true, it's not quite the nature of the way that sounds, because it looks like if you're going to have a direct look at somebody else, you actually have to go up to what appears to be a little window. So unless you're literally standing at your door, you don't have a direct line of sight to other people. It doesn't look like you could be sitting in your bunk and be looking at somebody else at the same time. You'll see for yourself when I get down to that. I'm trying to go in order. I could probably organize this a little differently, but this just makes the most sense to me. Another quote that stands out because we're going to have more conflicting information. MCC New York SHU staff members do not conduct the 4 p.m. or 10 p.m. inmate counts. After approximately 10:40 p.m., SHU staff members do not conduct the required 30-minute rounds. Just keep in mind, they're saying that the 4 o'clock and 10 p.m. inmate counts did not happen. If you just want to understand how this is all organized right here is where the officers sit. L tier is right there. You can see this teeny little staircase right here that leads up. So look here at the stair. Now I want you to look at the way that this is set up right here. So there's one staircase leading down to M tier, and there's a staircase leading up to L tier. It's not all that wide. If you really hugged the right side of it, you could avoid being spotted on that camera. That would not be that hard to do. And then you can see where it leads up right here. Now, as I pointed out earlier, it looked like somebody either put their head out or put an arm out, maybe even leaned over, which would help them see if anybody was seated over here or if there was anybody that they weren't aware of down here. And then that leads right up into L tier. So think about this. It's claimed that Officer Noel walked up there at 10:40, but we never saw her come back down. I looked as best as I could. Unless she was avoiding being seen coming back down, we certainly didn't see her walk down. And we didn't see her walk down with linens. If the linens were spotted going up, they would be even more visible coming down because they would be in front of her. So what happened to the linens and the clothing that allegedly she took upstairs? It doesn't add up. It doesn't make any sense at all. And if she did give them to somebody, that's not indicated here because nobody indicates that they received any of those things. So here's what I was talking about, how to be able to see into somebody else's cell, you'd have to be standing right up there. The windows are tiny. And here you can see Eltier's entry door, and there is Epstein's cell right there open. And there's the little window I was talking about. So when they say they have a direct line of sight, like I said, in theory, that's true if you were like standing up and looking through that window. But otherwise, you're not going to be able to see much of anything unless somebody passes right in front of your door. Now, this is significant because there's a very important point I'm going to talk about in a minute that I think is extremely important. And I'm not just trying to get you to sit through this video. It's just hard to go through every last thing without going in order. But there's something about tearing the sheets that's going to really stand out. I just want you to get an idea of how close this officer's station is to Epstein's room. It is not that far from his cell at all. All right, now we're getting to a section I call 73+1. This is very confusing. I had actually thought about doing a video on this previously, but it's so confusing, in fact, that I thought, you know what, I'm just going to skip it. But actually, it's too relevant to this, so we're going to go over it. Try to bear with me. I'm going to explain it as best as I can. So what this is relevant to is how many people are housed in each tier. They do a head count. So in other words, they count how many inmates there are. Shouldn't change that much unless somebody leaves. I'm going to read a quote from it. We'll talk about it. We'll keep going. At the time of the 10 p.m. count, all inmates in the MCC New York SHU, including Epstein, were locked in their cells for the night. All right, makes sense. Nobody's up and around after 10 p.m. At or around that time, the two officers assigned to the SHU were responsible for conducting the 10 p.m. stand-up count. At 10 p.m. on August 9th, the two assigned SHU officers were Noel and the material handler. Through a review and analysis of the SHU security camera video, witness statements, and BOP records, the OIG determined that MCC New York staff did not perform the 10 p.m. count in the SHU, so it was not done at 10 p.m. Nonetheless, Noel and the material handler completed and signed the 10 p.m. SHU count slip. The 10 p.m. SHU count slip listed the total number of inmates as 73 plus 1. So all of that is to say that they didn't actually do the head count, but they counted 73 inmates, and there was a plus 1 written on there. So that was, wherever they sourced that information, that's what they wrote down. It'll all start to make more sense in a minute. The material handler verified that he and Noel signed the 10 p.m. count slip and believed that Noel called the control center with their count numbers. He did not know why the count slip listed 73 plus 1. That plus 1 was unusual. Noel told the OIG that she had conducted the SHU count alone at 10 p.m., and that the material handler signed the count slip even though he did not conduct the count with her. However, the OIG's review and analysis of the SHU security camera video conflicts with Noel's statement that she conducted the 10 p.m. count. So, and we know that she falsified this, but she claimed, even in spite of all this, that she actually did the 10 p.m. count, which we know for a fact she didn't do. Noel said she wrote the 73 on the count slip, but she did not remember if she or someone else had written plus 1 on the count slip, and she did not know why plus 1 was on the count slip. So that seems like a pretty strange thing to forget, whether or not you had written plus 1 on the count slip. Now, I understand why she's saying she didn't know why plus 1 was written on there, but to say she didn't remember whether or not she had written it on there, there needs to be a much better explanation than just she just doesn't remember. We're going to get into why 73 matters so much and the plus 1 matters so much in a minute, but I just want you to keep in mind those are the numbers that they're sticking with. Noel said she did not know that the 10 p.m. SHU count slip, which listed 73 inmates, was inaccurate, and she could not explain why the 12 a.m. count also inaccurately listed that 73 inmates were physically present in the SHU, whereas the 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. count slips accurately listed 72 inmates in the SHU. So, there were actually 72 people there, but for some reason, at both 10 o'clock and at 12 o'clock, she said there were 73. And then the next count, which they falsified, but at the next count, they were actually accurate and said 72. So why is it that both 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock, they had an extra inmate listed on the official documents that they wrote. When questioned by the OIG about the 10 p.m. shoe count slip that listed 73 plus 1 inmates and was signed by the material handler and Noel, Senior Officer Specialer 6 told the OIG that he believed the plus 1 on the count slip was in his handwriting. So in other words, for whatever reason, this person, the senior officer, said that he probably added the plus 1. So Senior Officer Specialist 6 said that because there were, in actuality, only 72 inmates in the shoe during the 10 p.m. count, he should have written 73 minus 1 on the shoe count slip rather than 73 plus 1. So now this is part of why it gets so confusing. So there were actually 72 inmates. So basically what was done is called ghost counting, or at least according to the Senior Officer Specialist, where you add a plus or minus 1 onto the official forms. It says ghost counting is not permitted. You can't do that. So why he's claiming that that's what he did continues to be puzzling. So not only was the 73 inaccurate, should have been 72 unless there was another inmate there at 1040. Not only was that inaccurate, he also wrote plus 1, which is a very strange mistake to make if you meant to write minus 1. The whole thing is incredibly strange. And nowhere in this does it give an adequate explanation. It just says this is what happened and it moves on because they're just, I guess, saying mistakes happen. And that's part of the troubling part of this, is that things like that are never adequately explained. Now, here's where it starts to get even more confusing. Noel told the OIG that she and Correctional Officer 3 conducted the 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. counts in MCC New York's 10 South unit, which is the single-celled structure unit adjacent to the shoe. I do wonder if that's what room 46, if you see that door, if that's what leads to this area, the 10 South unit. So why is it that she's going to another unit to do counts and didn't do a single count in her own unit? That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So she leaves the unit to go do counts elsewhere and doesn't count what she's supposed to. She doesn't even do her primary job, but is going somewhere else to do it. How does this make any sense whatsoever? So she wasn't willing to walk just a few feet to do a head count in her own units that were literally feet away from her. And yet she walked up a flight of stairs, went through a door, went to a whole nother area to do counts elsewhere. It just doesn't add up. That just doesn't make any sense logically. And it also says that according to Noel, no one other than the morning watch operations lieutenant and CO3, or Correctional Officer 3, as detailed later below, entered the shoe during her shift, which is, once again, verifiably and demonstrably false. There are many people that come and go from the shoe. And that's not just me thinking that you can see people. They come in and out through this door. There are plenty of people who walk through the shoe, not just these two. So that, once again, is unequivocally not true. So here's a quote from Officer Noel that really stands out to me, and I think you're going to see why pretty quickly. When asked which rounds she conducted on August 9th, 2019, Noel responded, "That's hard for me to tell because I didn't conduct it every 30 minutes. It was to give out food, pick up the trays, give out toilet paper, go down. Those were the rounds I conducted." You'll notice she didn't say anything about taking linens or bringing clothes to any of the inmates that night. All she talked about was giving out food, picking up trays, giving out toilet paper. She said nothing about bringing fresh linens or bringing fresh clothes. Now, if that was the only round she actually did that night, why isn't that one of the things that was listed off? Why was it every other thing? So right here, there's no evidence whatsoever that she, in fact, actually even claimed to have taken those things up to her. They come to that conclusion, but I haven't seen any quote where she says, yes, I, in fact, carried linens up there. She certainly didn't say it right here. Noel told the OIG that she went through each tier in the shoe at approximately 10 p.m., which, according to the OIG, is not true. They have said, in plain language, that did not happen at 10 p.m. And at the time, she went to Epstein's cell and saw him laying on a mattress on the floor, which she said was typical for him. Epstein asked Noel for his medical device, so she plugged it in for him. Noel saw that Epstein was in the cell by himself and without a cellmate, but she maintained that she did not know that Epstein was required to have a cellmate. Noel told the OIG that she went through each tier in the shoe at approximately 10 p.m., and at the time she went to Epstein's cell and saw him laying on a mattress on the floor, which she said was typical for him. Now, according to the OIG, she didn't actually check on him at 10 p.m. Epstein asked Noel for his medical device, so she plugged it in for him. Noel saw that Epstein was in a cell by himself and without a cellmate, but she maintained that she did not know that Epstein was required to have a cellmate. So this whole part right here is confusing because the OIG himself has claimed there was no 10 p.m. check-in. So it's anybody's guess as to what this is talking about. Through a review and analysis of the shoe footage, witness statements, and BOP records, the OIG determined that at approximately 10:40 p.m., a CO believed to be Noel carried linen or inmate clothing up to L tier, which was the last time any CO approached the only entrance to the shoe tier in which Epstein was housed. So they're not even sure that it was Officer Noel that went up there. Even though they're saying that it was somebody taking up clothes, they don't even know who it was. At no point did she say that she took clothes up there. At no point did anybody later on, which we'll get to, say that they received clothes or linens at that time. So this is quite a conclusion for something that has zero evidence other than just that's the conclusion that they came to. This is not backed up by anything that we've seen. So now I'm going to read a little bit of when they found Epstein's body. Now, there's one part about this that really stands out to me. I'm going to explain why in just a second. Noelle heard Thomas call out for her to retrieve the cutter, and then she heard Thomas rip something. Now, she was outside of the cell, so she could hear Thomas ripping the piece of cloth that was around Epstein. But I want you to think about this. Think about how much force it takes to tear and rip something. It makes sense that she would hear that rip. So she said, hey, he ripped it. I don't even need to get a cutter because it was so obvious that something tore and something ripped. I want you to go back to how close that desk is to Epstein's cell. So if we're to understand right, her standing outside of the cell, she could hear this tiny little piece of cloth get torn as it was being pulled off of him. And yet Epstein shredding full-on sheets and clothes in order to make something, none of that was heard. Do you know how much force it takes to shred something like that? It's not easy, and it is definitely audible. So there's no way you could quietly shred something. You couldn't do it peacefully and quietly. He didn't have any way to cut it. So he would have had to have torn it, and nobody could hear that. And yet right here she's talking about the fact that it makes a sound when ripped. So here's something that I cannot explain. How is it that Epstein shredded and ripped this stuff? Nobody heard it. The inmates didn't talk about it. The COs didn't hear it. So how on earth did he shred these things and do it and be completely inaudible while doing it? Now, if somebody was going in there to do this to him, they probably would have gone in with things pre-shredded. They're not going to go in there and then shred up the sheets and clothing that are in there. So there's aspects of this that truly make no sense. And just to clarify for anybody wondering whether or not he had just done something sophisticated with a piece of cloth and didn't tear it, the photographs of Epstein's cell on August 10th, 2019 show an excess of blankets, linens, and clothing. Some of the linens had been ripped into thin strips, which were tied to the desk and bunk bed inside the cell. So they were ripped into thin strips. That would be audible. I don't know how he did it without that being heard. Just to briefly go into what the inmates saw. So inmate 5, who was also in the same tier, directly across from Epstein's cell. I talked about this before because of the timing of it, that he said that the last count was conducted a little bit before midnight. He doesn't say anything about anybody bringing him any sheets or anybody offering him any clothes, anything like that. Then we go into inmate 6, believe that the last check was between 12:30 and 1, something like that. Once again, no report that they got anything like clothes, sheets, linens, or anything like that. Inmate 7, who doesn't have as good a view as the other ones do, also didn't say anything about being brought anything at 10:40 at night. All right, let's go ahead and stop here. Hopefully this forensic analysis is helping you better understand some of this report as well as the footage that we watched. To me, it was incredibly compelling to see somebody from, by all accounts, was wearing an orange jumpsuit walk up those stairs towards Jeffrey Epstein's cell, and that nobody was observed coming back down. Unfortunately, this document did nothing to make me think that it can explain what we observed. There is so much inconsistency, and that's what's so crazy about this. This is, I think, my third video analyzing this report, and if you put it all together, there's still so much I haven't covered. It is remarkable how many inconsistencies and holes there are in this, and how many logical fallacies there are. But there's nothing in this report that adequately explains what we saw other than they think, well, maybe Officer Noel was the one that we saw, but we don't know, and she didn't claim it was. Maybe somehow 73 inmates were reported, but there were only 72, and it's just a coincidence that that was at 10 and at midnight, but not at 3 and 5 a.m. There's so many aspects of this that make no sense. So do I believe that we, in fact, have Jeffrey Epstein's killer on film? Yes, I do. So if you have any other thoughts about this, let me know in the comments below. If there's anything else you want me to analyze, I'd also like to hear about that. Last thing before we get finished up is I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.